So I got something super cool for you today, Adrian. Like one of the most fascinating unsolved mysteries in American history. But before we dive into today's insane mystery, make sure you hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment. We love the feedback.
Oh, I'm totally ready for this, Grace. What are we diving into on Case Closed today?
Today we're talking about a man who, basically became a legend overnight. He hijacked a plane, demanded $200,000 in cash, and then just disappeared into thin air. Literally.
D.B. Cooper. Oh my God, I'm so excited about this one. It's like, the perfect crime that nobody has been able to solve for, what, over 50 years now?
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, well, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in FBI history, this mysterious man was never found. Like, how does someone just vanish like that?
And that's what makes this case absolutely fascinating, right? The fact that someone could pull off something this brazen and just get away with it. No identity, no body, just gone. And it's exactly why we love doing Case Closed. These stories leave us obsessed, bald, and debating for decades. A question for you. Do you think D.B. Cooper survived the jump, or did he die trying? Drop your theory in the comments below.
I know our listeners are going to love this one. So, shall we get into the mysterious case of D.B. Cooper and the only unsolved commercial airline hijacking in U.S. history? So, Adrian, let's start with the basics. Who exactly was D.B. Cooper? I mean, I know he hijacked a plane, but, what else do we know about this mysterious figure?
That's the thing, Grace. We don't actually know who D.B. Cooper really was. It's fascinating because, D.B. Cooper isn't even his real name. On November 24th, 1971, a man who bought his airline ticket under the name Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. Somewhere along the way, the media mistakenly reported his name as D.B. instead of Dan, and the name just stuck.
Wait, so we don't even know his actual name? That's wild.
Exactly. We know almost nothing concrete about him. Witnesses described him as a middle-aged man, probably in his mid-40s, about 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet tall, wearing a business suit with a black tie and white shirt. He was just, totally unremarkable looking. Calm, polite, well-spoken. He ordered a bourbon and soda on the flight, paid for it, and even offered the flight attendant the change as a tip.
He sounds so normal, like not what you'd expect from someone about to commit a major crime.
Right? That's what makes this case so compelling. He didn't seem nervous or suspicious at all. After takeoff, he passed a note to one of the flight attendants, saying he had a bomb in his briefcase. He opened it just enough for her to see what looked like wires and red cylinders. And then he made his demands minus $200,000 in cash, which would be about $1.3 million in today's money, and 4 parachutes.
4 parachutes? Why would he need 4 if he was alone?
That's the brilliant part. Investigators think it was to make authorities believe he might force some crew members to jump with him so they wouldn't, give him sabotaged parachutes. The guy was clever, clearly thought this through.
So, what happened after he made these demands? Did they just give him what he wanted?
They did. When the plane landed in Seattle, they exchanged the passengers for the money and parachutes. Then, with just the flight crew remaining, he ordered them to take off again, heading south toward Mexico. And somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, in the darkness and pouring rain, he just jumped out of the plane with the money strapped to him. And that was it. D.B. Cooper vanished into American legend.
And no one's seen him since? Like, not a single confirmed sighting?
Not a single confirmed sighting. The FBI interviewed thousands of suspects over the years, but nothing definitive. It's like he disappeared into thin air. And that's what makes the D.B. Cooper case so enduring. He pulled off what many consider the perfect crime.
Okay, so, let's get into the actual hijacking. How exactly did he pull this off? Because I'm picturing, like, a chaotic scene with people screaming and, terror in the air.
That's the thing that's so fascinating about this case, Grace. It was nothing like that. It was actually, super calm and methodical. So Cooper boards this Boeing 727 in Portland, right? And it's a short 30-minute flight to Seattle. He's sitting in seat 18C, which is near the back of the plane. And shortly after takeoff, he He just calmly passes a note to Florence Schaffner, one of the flight attendants.
What did the note say? I mean, did she know immediately that it was a hijacking?
Well, at first she thought it was, like a businessman slipping her his phone number or something. She actually, without even reading it, she just put it in her pocket. And then Cooper leans over and says, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb."
Oh my God, I can't imagine how terrifying that would be.
Right? But here's where it gets weird. Cooper was so polite about the whole thing. When Florence asked to see the bomb, he opened his briefcase just enough for her to glimpse what looked like red cylindrical sticks and wires. Then he very calmly detailed his demands. $200,000 in unmarked bills, 2 back parachutes, 2 front parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the plane.
And everyone just went along with it?
Exactly. The pilot was notified, who then told air traffic control, who contacted the FBI, and all while this is happening, the other passengers had no idea anything unusual was going on. Cooper was just sitting there sipping his bourbon and soda,
That's so bizarre. So the other passengers didn't know?
completely clueless. The flight crew told them there was a minor mechanical issue causing a delay in Seattle. Meanwhile, the FBI was scrambling to gather the money and parachutes. And get this, Cooper was so specific about how he wanted things. He requested the money be delivered in a knapsack and specifically asked for the parachutes to be civilian models, not military ones.
He really thought of everything, huh?
Totally. And his demeanor throughout the whole thing was just bizarre. The flight attendants later described him as calm, polite, and well-spoken. Not threatening or abusive at all. He even, ordered a second bourbon and soda during the hijacking and paid for it. Can you believe that? He actually paid for his drink while committing a crime.
Wait, he paid for his drink during a hijacking?
Yeah. And he even told the flight attendant to keep the change as a tip. It's like he was following some kind of gentleman criminal code or something. He never raised his voice, never made any threats beyond the bomb. The flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, who spent the most time with him, said he was just courteous, almost pleasant to deal with.
That's so weird. It almost makes him more terrifying in a way, you know? Like, who is this cool, calm, collected guy hijacking a plane?
Exactly. And that's part of what's made this case so enduring. He wasn't some crazed madman. He was methodical, intelligent, and oddly considerate. When the plane was stuck on the tarmac in Seattle, he was even concerned about the comfort of the flight crew, telling them they could move around the cabin to relieve pressure on their feet. What kind of hijacker does that?
So what happened with the ransom money? I mean, $200,000 in 1901 must have been a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely. That would be like $1.3 million today. And, the way Cooper specified the money was super interesting. He wanted $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, which was a really specific request. The FBI had to scramble to get all that cash together on Thanksgiving Eve.
Did they just hand over the money? No tricks or anything?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. So, the FBI actually decided to, microfilm all the bills before delivering them. They recorded all 10,000 serial numbers, and they deliberately gave him bills with serial numbers that started with the letter L from the 1969 series, all from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. That way, if any of the money ever showed up in circulation, they'd know it was Cooper's ransom money.
Smart. So they could track the money if he tried to spend it.
Exactly. And Cooper probably had no idea they'd done this. The FBI delivered the cash in a knapsack just like he asked. But the parachute situation was... Well, it's really fascinating.
What do you mean?
So Cooper asked for 4 parachutes, right? 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes. And for years, investigators thought this meant he might have had an accomplice, since he asked for 4. But actually, the prevailing theory now is that he requested extra parachutes to make authorities think he might have a hostage jump with him, which would ensure they didn't tamper with any of the parachutes.
Oh, that's actually really clever.
Right? And here's where it gets even crazier. One of the reserve chutes they gave him was actually a training model that was was sewn shut. It couldn't actually be used in a jump. It was a dummy chute used for classroom instruction.
Wait, seriously? So he got a non-working parachute?
Yeah, and the FB, I was hoping he'd select that one by mistake. But Cooper must have known enough about parachutes to avoid using the dummy chute, which again tells us something about his background, right?
So once he had the money and parachutes, what happened with the flight path? Did he just tell them where to go?
Yeah, and he was incredibly specific about it. After they refueled in Seattle, he told the pilots to fly to Mexico City, but at a very specific altitude, below 10,000 feet, and at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling, like around 170 knots. And he wanted the landing gear to remain down during the flight and the flaps at 15 degrees.
That sounds like someone who really knew planes.
Totally. And the reason for these demands became clear later. He wanted to fly low enough that he wouldn't need oxygen to breathe when he jumped. The slower speed and specific flap configuration made it safer for him to jump from the rear stairs. And get this, he specifically requested the plane fly with the rear staircase down. That's the aft stairs on the Boeing 727.
So he basically created the perfect conditions for his escape?
Exactly. The flight crew wasn't even allowed in the cabin with him. It was just Cooper alone, with all that money and those parachutes, planning his escape while the plane flew through the night. And what's really wild is that the pilots had no idea when he actually jumped. They were just flying the route he demanded while he prepared in the back of the plane.
Wow, so at some point during this flight, he just jumped into the darkness?
Yeah, and the conditions that night were absolutely terrible for skydiving. I mean, like, just unbelievably bad. So what we know is that somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Cooper lowered that rear staircase and jumped into the night. The crew actually felt a pressure change in the cabin around 8:13 p.m., which they later realized was probably the moment he jumped.
How high up was the plane when he jumped?
So they were flying at about 10,000 feet when he made the jump. And Grace, this is why this is so insane. It was November in the Pacific Northwest, right? So it was cold, like really cold. The temperature outside the plane was estimated to be around -7 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh my God!
I know. And it wasn't just cold. There was this raging thunderstorm below with heavy rain, wind, and it was pitch black. You couldn't see anything. No visibility whatsoever.
But wouldn't he have, like, frozen to death?
That's part of what makes this so incredible. He jumped wearing only a business suit and a raincoat. No special gear, no thermal protection, nothing. He wasn't dressed for skydiving at all. And experts say that the wind chill at that altitude, moving at that speed, would have been brutal. We're talking about wind chill factors reaching maybe -70 degrees.
Jesus! I mean, how would anyone survive that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Most skydiving experts say he probably didn't. You know, beyond the cold, he was jumping into a complete unknown. He had no idea what was below him. Mountains, forests, water, power lines. And the area he jumped over was extremely remote, rugged wilderness in southwest Washington.
But he chose that location, right? That must mean something.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that suggests he might have had some knowledge of the area. But consider this. He was jumping with a military-style parachute that wasn't steerable. Basically just a round canopy that goes wherever the wind takes it. And in those weather conditions, with the wind gusts from the storm, he would have had almost no control over where he landed.
So he just disappeared into the wilderness?
Pretty much. The FBI estimated he probably landed somewhere in the heavily wooded area near Lake Merwin in southwest Washington. It's this incredibly dense, mountainous terrain. And remember, he was carrying all that money, about 21 pounds of cash strapped to his body. That would have made it even harder to control his descent and landing.
It almost sounds like a suicide mission.
Many investigators have concluded exactly that, like either he didn't know what he was doing and died in the jump, or he knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care if he survived. Because one other crucial detail is that the parachute he used was a manual one. He'd have had to pull the ripcord himself, in the dark, in freezing temperatures, while falling at 170 miles per hour through a thunderstorm.
That's absolutely terrifying.
Right? And no one on the ground reported seeing a parachute that night. No one reported hearing a plane. The wilderness just swallowed him up. It was the perfect vanishing act, intentional or not.
So what happened next? I mean, after he disappeared into thin air like that?
Well, what followed was like one of the most extensive manhunts in FBI history. I mean, it was massive, absolutely massive. The morning after the hijacking, the FBI mobilized hundreds of agents and military personnel to search the area where they thought Cooper might have landed.
Wait, how did they even know where to look?
So they used the flight path data and wind calculations to narrow down this search zone of about 28 square miles of really dense forest in southwest Washington. The terrain was just, absolutely brutal, thick woods, deep ravines, mountains. And it was still pouring rain, which made everything so much worse.
That sounds like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was like. And, they brought in everything. Helicopters, ground teams with dogs, military personnel. They were combing through this wilderness for weeks. But they found absolutely nothing. No body, no parachute, no money, no evidence that Cooper had even been there at all. It was like he just vanished into thin air.
How long did they keep searching?
Oh my God, Grace, they never really stopped. I mean, the active ground search ended after a few weeks because, well, they had nothing to go on. But the case itself, the FB, I kept it open for 45 years. Like, this was the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. aviation history, and they were determined to solve it.
45 years? That's insane. Did they ever find any solid leads during all that time?
There were tons of leads over the years, thousands of them. The FBI interviewed hundreds and hundreds of potential suspects. They followed up on, every single tip that came in. But the problem was that D.B. Cooper became this cultural phenomenon, right? So people were constantly coming forward claiming to be him, or to know him, or claiming their uncle or neighbor was the famous hijacker.
Oh, I bet that made the investigation even harder.
It totally did. And you have to remember, the FB, I was working with very limited physical evidence. They had the cigarette butts Cooper left on the plane, some fingerprints, and a partial DNA sample they eventually extracted from the clip-on tie he left behind. But this was the 1970s. DNA testing wasn't even a thing yet when the hijacking happened.
What about the physical description? Couldn't they use that to narrow things down?
Well, yeah, they had witness descriptions, but they were they were pretty generic, Mid-40s white male, 5 feet 10 inches to 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, olive complexion, dark hair. I mean, that could be thousands of people. The flight attendants worked with FBI artists to create sketches, and those became those iconic images we all recognize today. But it's not like they had security cameras on planes back then.
Were there any suspects that seemed, I don't know, more credible than others?
Oh yeah, definitely. Over the decades, the FBI seriously investigated about 800 suspects. Some of the more interesting ones included this guy named Richard McCoy, who actually conducted a very similar hijacking just months after Cooper. But he was eventually ruled out because he didn't match the physical description closely enough.
Any others?
There was this really interesting suspect named Kenneth Christensen, who was a former paratrooper and an employee of Northwest Orient Airlines, the exact airline Cooper hijacked. His own brother suspected him after finding a large amount of cash hidden in his house after he died. And then there was Robert Rackstraw, a decorated Vietnam veteran with parachute training and a criminal record. The FBI investigated him multiple times.
So with all these leads and suspects, why couldn't they solve it?
That's the thing that makes this case so fascinating. They just never had enough evidence to definitively link anyone to the crime. Every promising lead would eventually hit a dead end. And as time went on, potential witnesses died, evidence degraded, and the trail just got colder and colder.
So, wait, with such a massive search effort and so many suspects, did they ever find any, physical evidence that could tell us what actually happened to Cooper?
Actually, yes. In February 1980, so 9 years after the hijacking, there was this huge breakthrough. This young boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit for a family picnic along the Columbia River at a place called Tina Bar which is about 20 miles northwest of Portland. Again, you know what he found? He literally dug up $5,800 in deteriorated $20 bills buried in the sand.
Oh my God, was it Cooper's money?
It absolutely was. The FBI confirmed that the serial numbers matched a portion of the ransom money. But here's the thing. It was only a small bundle, just 294 bills out of the original 10,000, and they were, like, severely damaged, decaying, still bound together in these rubber bands that somehow hadn't rotted away completely.
That's wild. What did that tell investigators about what happened to Cooper?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. And actually kind of confusing. Because, see, the location where the money was found didn't make a lot of sense. It was miles away from the estimated drop zone, and the bills were found buried together in this kokuk, this neat stack, which suggested that they hadn't been dispersed by the wind during his fall.
So how did they end up there?
That's the million-dollar question. There are a few theories. One is that Cooper's body and the money ended up in a tributary somewhere, and eventually, some of the cash washed downstream to where it was found. Another theory is that Cooper actually survived the jump but lost some of the money during his escape, and it made its way to the Columbia River.
What do you think is more likely?
I personally lean toward the theory that Cooper didn't survive. The conditions that night were just brutal, and landing in that terrain in the dark with an unfamiliar parachute, I mean, the odds were stacked against him. And if you think about it, if he had survived, why wouldn't he have recovered all of the money? That was the whole point, right?
Any other physical evidence besides the money?
Very little, honestly. In 2017, the FBI allowed a group of amateur investigators to examine some items from the case, and they discovered what might be particles of titanium on Cooper's clip-on tie. This was interesting because titanium was pretty rare in the early 70s, mostly used in high-tech industries like aerospace.
Oh, so that could narrow down where he worked?
Right. It suggested that Cooper might have worked in the aerospace industry, possibly even at Boeing, which was headquartered in Seattle. This would also explain his apparent knowledge of aircraft and parachutes. But again, it's circumstantial, not enough to pinpoint exactly who he was.
What about the parachutes? Were they ever found?
So they found one of the parachutes, the one he didn't use. It was the reserve chute that remained on the plane, but the two he jumped with never recovered. And, that's actually quite telling. If he had died on impact, you'd expect to eventually find the parachutes, or at least parts of them tangled in trees or scattered somewhere in the search area. The fact that they never turned up keeps the mystery alive.
So, with all this evidence and investigation, what are the main theories about what actually happened to Cooper? Did he survive the jump or not?
So there are basically two main camps in the D.B. Cooper world, right? The survival theory and the death theory. The survival theory suggests that Cooper was this experienced parachutist who knew exactly what he was doing. He planned this whole thing meticulously, landed safely, and then just disappeared with the money. His supporters point to, his calm demeanor during the hijacking and his apparently specific knowledge about parachutes.
And what about the death theory?
The death theory, which is actually what most FBI agents who worked the case believe, is that Cooper didn't survive that jump. I mean, think about it. He jumped into a freezing cold, rainy night at 10,000 feet over rugged wilderness. He was wearing a business suit and loafers. Not exactly survival gear, Plus, he took the dummy reserve parachute, which suggests he might not have known what he was doing as much as he pretended to.
That does sound pretty damning when you put it like that.
Exactly. And if he did survive, and this was such a perfect crime, why was a portion of the money found buried on a riverbank? It just doesn't add up. Many investigators believe his body is still out there somewhere in the vast wilderness, and we just haven't found it.
Have there been any compelling suspects over the years?
Oh my God, so many. There have been literally hundreds of suspects and persons of interest. One of the most famous is Richard Floyd McCoy, who, get this, pulled off a very similar hijacking just months after Cooper in April 1972. He also parachuted out of a plane with ransom money, but he was quickly caught. Some FBI agents thought they were the same person, but ultimately McCoy was ruled out because he didn't match the physical description.
Who else stands out?
There's Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper who worked for Northwest Orient Airlines and actually resembled the Cooper sketches. His own brother came forward after his death and said he believed Kenneth was Cooper. Then there's Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam vet with parachute training and a criminal record who some private investigators were absolutely convinced was Cooper.
Did any of these suspects seem more likely than others?
The thing is, each suspect has some compelling connections, but also major problems. Like Dwayne Weber, who confessed to his wife on his deathbed that he was D.B. Cooper. She became convinced and found some evidence that seemed to connect him to the case. But his DNA didn't match what little they recovered from Cooper's tie.
Wait, they have Cooper's DNA?
Well, they have partial DNA samples recovered from the tie he left behind, but it's degraded and incomplete. The FBI has used it to rule out some suspects, but it's not comprehensive enough to definitively identify the hijacker on its own.
Any recent suspects that seem promising?
There's actually this really interesting theory about a guy named William J. Smith that emerged in 2018. He was a Canadian war hero and paratrooper who apparently looked very similar to the sketches. His niece came forward with evidence that he might have been Cooper, including the fact that he disappeared for a few days around the time of the hijacking. But like all the others, there's no smoking gun to definitively prove it was him.
It's so interesting how Cooper became such a, cultural phenomenon. I mean, for a criminal, he sure got a lot of, admiration, didn't he?
Oh my God, Grace, absolutely. D.B. Cooper has become this incredible folk hero in American culture, and it's fascinating because he's technically, a criminal who committed an act of air piracy, but people just love him. He's like this mysterious gentleman bandit who outsmarted the system and potentially got away with it.
Why do you think people are so fascinated by him?
Well, I think it's because Cooper pulled off what many consider the perfect crime, right? He was polite, he didn't hurt anyone, and he just vanished. There's something almost romantic about it. Plus, it happened in the early 70s, when there was already this, growing distrust of authority and government institutions. So here's this ordinary-looking guy who stuck it to the airlines, the FBI, and just disappeared into thin air with the money.
So, what kind of cultural impact has he had over the years?
It's been massive. There are literally dozens of books written about the case. There's even an annual Cooper convention called CooperCon, where enthusiasts and amateur sleuths get together to discuss theories. And the impact on pop culture has been just incredible. Like the 1981 movie, The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, starring Treat Williams. Or how Cooper shows up in episodes of shows like Prison Break and Leverage.
I had no idea his influence was so widespread.
Oh yeah. And in the Pacific Northwest, where all this happened, there are Cooper-themed bars, beer. There's even a D.B. Cooper Day celebration in Ariel, Washington. He's become this legendary figure that represents this perfect blend of mystery and this kind of anti-establishment spirit that really resonates with people, you know what I mean?
Has it influenced other criminals? Were there copycat hijackings?
That's actually a great question. In the years following Cooper's hijacking, there were over a dozen copycat skyjackings, so many that the FBI named them Cooper copycats, but none achieved the same mystique or success. It actually led to major changes in airport security. The FAA mandated screening of all passengers and carry-on luggage in January 1973, which is something we all just take for granted now.
So in a way, D.B. Cooper changed air travel forever.
Totally. He's the reason we have the security measures we have today. But despite all that, his legend just keeps growing. There are countless websites, podcasts like ours, online forums, all dedicated to solving this mystery 50 years later, and people are still absolutely obsessed with figuring out who D.B. Cooper really was and what happened to him.
So what's been happening with the case more recently? Is the FBI still actively looking for him? Or...
Oh, that's a really interesting development. So in 2016, after 45 years of active investigation, the FBI officially suspended the case. They essentially said, look, we've done everything we can, and they decided to allocate their resources elsewhere. But they did say they'd consider any physical evidence that might emerge related to the money or the parachute.
Wait, so they just gave up?
Well, not exactly gave up, but yeah, kind of. They called it one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. They followed thousands of leads, interviewed countless witnesses, searched the drop zone multiple times, and examined all the evidence scientifically. But at some point, they had to make the call that the resources could be better used elsewhere.
People haven't stopped looking, right?
God, no. If anything, the citizen sleuthing has just exploded in recent years. There's this incredible network of amateur detectives who are absolutely dedicated to solving this case. There are these really detailed websites where people analyze everything from the weather patterns that night to, like, wound ballistics if Cooper was shot during the jump.
That's so intense.
It really is. And with the internet, these communities have gotten so sophisticated. There's this group called the Cooper Research Team that's actually done their own evidence collection. They've gone out to Tenna Bar, where the money was found, and conducted their own soil analysis and geological surveys. It's pretty impressive stuff.
Has any of this citizen detective work produced anything promising?
Well, there have been some interesting developments. In 2017, a group called Citizen Sleuths worked with scientists to identify particles found on Cooper's clip-on tie that he left on the plane. They found rare earth elements that, at that time, were used in the manufacturing of cathode ray tubes. And this suggested Cooper might have been an engineer or someone who worked in an electronics production facility.
That's fascinating.
Right? And just last year, there was this documentary called The Mystery of D.B. Cooper on HBO that explored 4 different compelling suspects. So even though the official investigation is closed, the case is very much alive in the public imagination. I think it's one of those mysteries that people just won't let go of until we know for sure what happened to him.
So, after all these years, we still don't really know what happened to D.B. Cooper, do we?
No, and that's exactly what makes this case so fascinating, right? It's like, here's this guy who pulled off what should have been an impossible crime in the most dramatic way possible, and then just vanished into thin air. No resolution, no ending. Just gone.
I think that's why people are still so obsessed with it 50 years later. There's something about an unsolved mystery that just grabs hold of you and doesn't let go.
Absolutely. And it's not just any mystery, it's got all these elements that make it perfect for storytelling. You've got this mysterious, polite criminal who outsmarted the FBI, jumped from a plane in the middle of a storm with $200,000.
Like, you can't make this stuff up.
And the fact that we don't know if he survived or died, if he got away with it, or if his body is just out there somewhere in the wilderness, it lets people imagine whatever ending they want.
Do you have a theory? Do you think he made it?
You know what? I go back and forth on this constantly. Some days I think there's no way anyone could survive that jump, but then I think about how meticulously he planned everything else. The guy clearly knew what he was doing, so maybe? I honestly change my mind every time I look at the evidence.
That's what makes Case Closed such a fun podcast to do, right? These mysteries that keep us guessing.
Totally. If you enjoyed this breakdown and you're into unsolved cases, heists, and disappearances that don't add up, hit that subscribe button, give this episode a like, and leave a comment with your theory.
And stick around, we've got more unbelievable but true crime coming your way real soon.